You just see the devastated families when schools have to shutter their doors because they love the product and they love the environment for the kids. How about priests? And you've had some interesting conversations on the idea of allowing priests, or at least to have the conversation about maybe it's time to go back to where it was back, I guess, in the 13th century when priests were allowed to marry and have families. Do you think, from your perspective, a priest that is celibate is better necessarily than a priest that is married? Because Catholics know we have married priests right now if they come over from the Greek Orthodox wing or many other different ways.
No, we have many married priests right around our greater New York area, and they are what we call not members of the Latin Rite. They're as Roman Catholic as I am, yep. But they are Maronites or Melkites or Ukrainian Catholics or whatever. And have they done a good job? Do they do a good job? Absolutely. Is there anything in Catholic doctrine that would oppose having a non-celibate priesthood? Not at all. Who's going to make that decision? Well, certainly not I, but I certainly think that this is something that people are going to be talking about and are talking about. Where does Pope Francis stand? I don't know. The newspapers all jump to conclusions that, well, he's, in our estimate, a man thinks this way, therefore this is. I don't know exactly where he stands on this, but I would hope that your 100 million listeners and watchers would know that there is no problem with Catholic doctrine at all. In fact, we have in the Archdiocese of New York some former Episcopalian priests who are married and running parishes, and one is running a high school and doing it very well indeed. So in and of itself, is it an obstacle? Is it impossible with Catholic doctrine? The answer is no.
It's funny. Yesterday at Mass, relayed the story of there was a prostitute that was to be stoned, right. And Jesus turned and said, "For those without sin, cast the first stone," wonderful. And they all dispersed. Yeah. And maybe it's just memory, but it seemed that 15, 20 years ago in church, there was less about the culture wars than we'll hear on Sundays, and more about feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and the basic premise, sure. of looking out for those that don't have as much. Right. I talk to other people in the pews. I don't think I'm alone in that Sundays have gotten, for too many of us, too political, and the basics of what the church was, and not about the social debates, forgetting who's right and wrong on it. Do you hear that too?
Oh, surely, but I'm going to take a bow. In my 9 years, do you know one time that I was involved in a political discussion?
I would hazard the guess is no.
I've been very, very careful not to ever get involved. I'm friendly to all the politicians. I have great respect for the people who are our political leaders. It's not easy, and many of them do excellent, excellent work. But I have been very careful never to make a partisan statement or to get involved in any partisan politics at all. And I believe that's the right way to go. Now, others take a different approach. I don't like to get into this man's style or that man's style, but I'll say my style is this. I was, and I still believe, I'm a very good friend of Mayor Bloomberg, very good friend of Mayor Giuliani, good friend of Governor Pataki, good friend of the current Governor Cuomo, and so forth. I don't get into any public debates or discussions with them. I have many private meetings with politicians and tell them my position and my needs representing the Archdiocese. So I'm only going to tell you my own approach. I think you could look and look and you find out that I have avoided political involvements most carefully. and made it very clear to the priests that that's my approach. Is it the right approach? Is it the only approach? Let somebody else make that decision. But I certainly think you can trust that in my years, the political involvement was nothing.
Well, you know Pope Francis, and there are obviously, everyone's trying to fill in the gaps in the narrative, and only time can do that. But having a closer relationship than any of us have or ever will, he's got such an interesting biography, in that it doesn't seem by any accountant to be lip service why he chose the name Francis, obviously with the attachment to Assisi and his concern for the poor and his disattachment to material things. But he was also very vocal in his native Argentina on the subject of gay marriage, for example, that eventually passed. Do you think, and if he asked you, as a former colleague, the global appetite right now for Catholics, would it be to move the culture wars to the side, not to change the positions of the doctrine of the church, but just to focus more on the more than 1 billion people in this world living in poverty? What do you think?
Well, I did it that way.
Yeah.
That's exactly the way I did it. The reason we kept our schools open was I was a Franciscan beggar. Now, I did it in a different way. I did my begging in my living room at my dining room table, and if I might say, I was not unsuccessful. We poured tens of millions of dollars into the inner city schools, tens of millions of dollars into the suburban schools. I can tell you practically the budget of every one of the schools. And there are many ways to take care of the poor, and one is to encourage others to support. We rebuilt ourselves financially, and we increased the enrollment for the poor. We didn't decrease it. And I told you about Catholic Charities. In 9 years, the budget went up 126%. Now, what we do for the poor, both in Catholic Charities, in our schools, and in 1,000 other ways, is never discussed in the press. The press will discuss these kinds of issues that you mentioned, and that's life. That's the way it's going to be. But I can assure you that the achievement of the Archdiocese of New York in the area of service to the poor is immense. I'll tell you a little story. Years ago, when we were dedicating blocks and blocks of new housing that the Archdiocese created in the South Bronx, Mayor Giuliani was with me, and we were up on the platform. We each had to say something, you know. The Secretary of HUD was there, and so forth. And in a throwaway line, Mayor Giuliani, who's a good friend of mine, turned to me and he said, you know, without Catholic Charities, we couldn't run this city. And I said, well, you know, Your Honor, I'm going to speak right after you. And if you forget to say that, I'll tell the crowd what you just told me. Eh? And he laughed, and we get along very fine. But I don't think we've abandoned the poor. I don't think anyone.
No, I just think, and I don't think anyone that knows anything about the church would ever say that. To the contrary, they're, I think, lifelines to whole populations that otherwise get forgotten. It's that sometimes that's not seemingly the headline or the focus. And as much as the media may have failings in that, the church also, I think, sometimes doesn't talk enough about what it's doing and bring the other population into it as well.
Well, that well may be. I know for myself that certainly our care for those who are hurting, and all kinds of hurting, is very, very important. Our nursing homes and all of this are the best. Everyone wants to be in our nursing homes because of the care and the lack of bed sores and all of this kind of thing. And that's all part of our mission. And if people are talking about other things than that, I'd have to say I'm not one of them. I've stayed away from that other and tried to focus on what I think is central. And what I think is central is not just care of the poor. It's basic understanding of Catholic doctrine and Catholic commitment.
You may have seen, there was a poll done of American Catholics. And on all of the social issues where there's some debate, whether it's contraception or whatever else, the majority were with the more progressive, let's say, position. There's a line for them, but the people who go to Mass, maybe go to church maybe twice a year, the guys there in Easter and Christmas who always take the good seats in the pews when they're never there for the other 50 weeks, you know who we're talking about. But a lot of times they don't feel that they're welcome in the church. I've heard two different schools of thought, that the church says, you know what, maybe getting smaller isn't the worst thing, and we'll have more of the truly committed here. And then the other is, we shouldn't only just open our doors, but we should actively recruit and try and bring those people who may have either left or are casual at best. Which approach, you've probably heard both, which approach do you think is healthier for the church to take?
Well, yeah, it's a good conclusion to our conversation, because for me, the answer is you go out and invite more and more in, and that is absolutely the only approach that I would even consider. I was ordained for the Archdiocese of Chicago, and in 1957, I came home and I was assigned the 9th assistant. Imagine there were 9 curates at Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago at that time. And my primary assignment was what we called inquiry classes. At night on Tuesday and Thursday, we actually gave 4 classes. I can't give you the exact hours, but 1 class and then we repeated it, and then last week's class and then we repeated that. And we did this on Tuesday and Thursday. And then all during the week we interviewed the people. And I remember that the ending of that one inquiry class, the only one in which I was involved, Monsignor Patrick J. Hayes was the pastor, and he baptized 76 people at the conclusion for one of those. That might have been the Tuesday or the Thursday group, I forget which. And I can tell you there was nothing I ever did as a priest that I liked better than that. My mother said, I like the sound of my own voice. Maybe that's the answer. But we had signs up in the bakeries. Remember bakeries? You're too young to know about bakeries. And drugstores and everything there around Chicago Avenue in north side of Chicago. Come to our inquiry class and so forth. And I would say that I never was so exhilarated and so happy and so delighted with this. And this is what I believe in. I believe in going out and bringing people in. That's why I delight in telling you about our growth. That for me is the name of the game. And so in conclusion, I would simply say this, that I'm all for the go out and bring people in and sit down and talk and aim for understanding, aim for conversion, but understand that everyone is welcome, more than welcome. The door is always open, and I hope and pray we will continue to grow here in the Archdiocese of New York, because I do believe that the more people that hear the gospel and embrace it, the better we'll all be, the better the city, the nation, the world will be. Thanks a million.
Eminence, thank you so much.
Very good.